That's likely what's going to be happening for most of your courses, I would presume, next week, week 13. So this might be your last week of content. Tomorrow for design and image, we do have one last lesson that we need to work on. It's sort of a continuation on some of the stuff that we were doing last week when we worked with Daft Punk, we worked with those clouds, we worked with casts, color casts, and things like that. So this is now going to take us into using certain tools inside of Photoshop to create custom content, things like buttons, things that you might want to use as visuals that are incorporated as part of a dashboard or a website, like a button, that sort of thing. And I'll take you through the process both in Illustrator and in Photoshop. In Illustrator, we'll just open files that I'll provide to you, and we'll just tear them apart and go, well, how is this built? Here's what we do. And I'll show you a couple things while we're in Illustrator on how to create certain components of it. And then we will jump over to Photoshop and spend that time, or the rest of that time, actually building out a single component. We're gonna work on a volume dial, okay, which sort of has a three-dimensional quality to it. And we'll custom create that in Photoshop. The reason we're gonna spend more time in Photoshop than Illustrator is simply because the workflow for the Photoshop process is a little bit more involved than it is for Illustrator. And part of that is due to the fact that Photoshop creates, there's a lot more you can do with Photoshop in terms of making it look very realistic. You can do amazing things in Illustrator, but you can really make things look almost real in Photoshop. And then that will lead you into next term, where you're gonna start working with motion design in 3D, and you'll build some of these components as three-dimensional components, which then even look that much more sophisticated and more realistic. But there are times where a 3D model isn't going to work, and you might need it as a SVG, right? And so Illustrator, Photoshop can also be used for that, and you can sort of use them jointly, and we'll look at that as well. So that's what we're gonna do tomorrow. That will sort of cap off the rest of the term. That will cover everything that we need to cover for this term. And then what we'll do when we come back after term one, after the holiday, when we come back, we will have a week or two, week and a half maybe, of review, where we'll cover some of the things that we did this term, images again, anything that I see as maybe potentially, or saw rather, as problematic with the FIP submissions. I might go over some of those features again, and we'll revisit some of the things that we did last week and this week in Illustrator and Photoshop to sort of get us back on track, and then we'll launch into something completely new for Design and Image 2, okay? Before we get started with what we're doing today, I always do this at the end of the visual communications class. I know you're probably tired of hearing me talk. In fact, some of you aren't even listening to me now. Is very suggestive of that being the case. So what I do on this week is put it back onto you and say, okay, let's put what we've done throughout the term into practice and test you, informally, no grade associated, so don't worry about it. It's just sort of a fun exercise to go through a couple different design scenarios and go, okay, can I figure out how to do this? And we set it up as sort of a little competition so you can compete against one another and that sort of thing, okay? I'll explain that a little bit more when we get to it. So next week will be, like I say, a lab that will be time that we will allocate to for all of you to use to meet with me, either during visual communications class or design and image. Both those classes will be open for the purposes of the FIP and getting some feedback on that. I will go through your submissions for the checkpoint, which is due tomorrow, and I'll go over those submissions over the course of the weekend so that I have them and I've looked at them and I've graded them, and I'll have those ready to go so that when we start week 13, that will be there and we can discuss those files that you submitted, okay? And then, of course, after next week, which is week 13, the following week, the Monday, is when your FIP is due, okay? And I'll take you through, on Thursday, I'll take you through what I want you to submit for both visual communications and design images. It's all the same thing. So you're handing in essentially you are handing the exact same content, and I'll go through that tomorrow. So that's the last thing that we talk about before you leave to go to the weekend and into week 13. Okay, before we move on, are there any questions about anything, any concerns about anything pertaining to anything that we did last week, or maybe more specifically about the FIP? Everybody's now working away at it. Again, you have a deliverable tomorrow, Thursday, for the FIP checkpoint. I'm suggesting to people to maybe download the planning document. That was the homework number 2 in design and image, and you could use that XD file to populate it with whatever is relevant for the FIP at your current point with that project. If you don't want to use that document, that's fine. Some of you might actually have your FIP web pages done more or less, or have content in there. If you want to just send me a PDF of that, that's fine. You're doing it in XD, you just select the artboards, go File, export those artboards out as a PDF, and I can accept it that way. So as long as you're getting it to me as a PDF, I don't care how you generate it, and whatever you want to show me, if it has sketches, if it has rough work, if it has mood boards, if it has site map, if it has any of that, or it's just a finished design, whatever you want to do, or partially finished design, I should say. No questions? No? Yeah.
For the FIP template, do we just use the template, or can we change it a bit?
That's a good question. Let me open that up, because that is a good question. You are supposed to be following it pretty closely, but there's obviously some leeway there. So let's take a look at what that leeway might be, and actually look at the document. So I'm just going to the Final Integrated Project in our course content. And I'm just going to grab the XD file here, download it. This folder is just a folder, this last name underscore first name underscore FIP is what you can use to submit your work for your various classes. I know Trevor's is different because you're using GitHub with Trevor, right? So he's got a different process altogether for how you're going to submit files. So he'll communicate that to you about how he wants you to submit to his course. Your website for your web development course, how is that being submitted? Is that a physical, local submission that's being submitted, or is it a GitHub repository as well? You guys have Marco? You have Marco, right? Is it GitHub that you're using for that as well? I would assume it is. It typically is, but I didn't want to say that for sure. Maybe. So you don't know? Oh, okay. Let me find out. Let me shoot him a text. Let me get that figured out here. Hold on. Let's take a look at this while we're waiting. Anyway, that folder is there. Actually, I'll download that so we can take a look at that. And then this is just, of course, the PDF that takes you through the requirements, and they're essentially the same for visual communications and design and image. Because visual communications is, again, the theory behind what we cover in design, they're very similar. So with visual communications, we're looking more at the aesthetic. We're looking at things like consistency. We're looking at repeated design elements, and are you using those repeated design elements consistently? All those sorts of things. Have you done certain things with your images that are maybe distracting or incorrect in terms of squishing or stretching your images, which I'm still seeing being done. So please do not do that, because that has a negative effect in terms of your grades for visual communications, because aesthetically your design does not look good when you stretch or squish images. And then when we go over to design an image, you're clearly not following the proper protocol in terms of scaling images down proportionately. So therefore that gets reflected in design and image as well, because it's now a practical execution that's not being done accurately, not being done successfully on your part. So watch for those things. That's why I've sort of been stressing that as we're going through the term, make sure we're not doing those things. So hopefully you've been through this document. We've been through this document in class, and it just breaks down what I'm looking for from the design end of things. So then we had this folder. I'll just go through the folder really briefly, really quickly rather, because we have been through this. But there is this folder that I have that on both my courses, that if you download it, you can use this for all your classes, at least as you work on this assignment. So the CSS clearly is your CSS folder for your styles, your images, and your JS, so whatever you're doing there. I know most of your JS stuff is probably going to go on GitHub, but anyway, there's a folder there if you want to store anything locally. And then assets is really what's going to be relevant to my class, my classes, Joe's class, and those sorts of things where you're working more with applications. So you can see I've got the classes down here. Remember, I duplicated 1052, so you can just dump one of those folders. I should only have 5, but I've got 6, so I should have noticed that. But anyway, there is a duplicate of the 1050 course in there. So get rid of that, and then you'll have all 5 of your courses. Any Illustrator work that you're doing, so if you're doing logos, if you're doing, or a logo or logos, if you're doing anything in terms of icons, so if you do a shopping cart because you're setting up sort of a commerce-based a couple pages for your FIP, then anything that is Illustrator-based, please put your Illustrator file in that folder. And again, if it's an AI file, which is an Illustrator application file, please save it out as a legacy. So when you go File, Save As, and you give your naming convention to that file, and you hit OK, the next screen that's going to pop up is going to ask you how you want to format it. And you go to the drop-down menu and take it from the current one and bring it down to the next one, which is Legacy. Okay, that just ensures that I'll be able to open it regardless of the fact that you might have a slightly different version of Illustrator than I have. Okay, those are your Illustrator files, obviously your Photoshop files, anything that you're doing for Photoshop. And if you're following the process, and you don't have to, but if you're following the process that we've gone through in the past couple of weeks, where we took an XD file, your wireframe, you exported that out as an image type, a JPEG or a PNG, you brought that into Photoshop. Remember, we opened that in Photoshop. And then we went to all your photos, we renamed them in the folder, gave them proper web naming conventions with extensions. So it has to have JPEG, .jpeg. It has to have .png. It has to have .gif if you want them to be those types of files. And then when you're in Photoshop, we did the whole, ran a script. We loaded those images into a file stack, which opens up basically a new Photoshop document. Remember, and we drag them in one by one, or we drag them all in, however you want to do it. And then we clipped those to new shapes that we built off of the wireframe elements that are part of that JPEG or that PNG that you brought in. And once you did all of that, all you needed to do now was go save your file and ensure that generate image assets was checked off. And then what it does is Photoshop now will export out all of your images based on how you've sized them from that Photoshop file. Now your entire folder, well, not your entire images folder, but certainly your images for that particular page have been generated from that one single Photoshop file. So if you've done that work, throw it in there. I'd love to see that you followed that process. I'd love to open up your Photoshop file and take a look at that. Of course, you've got to include XD files. So you can provide a link to me, but please do not just provide a link to me. I need the working files, the local file. So when you're in XD and you go File, Save As, make sure you're saving to your computer, okay? That's local. And that's where you can save it, or at least I need a copy of what you've saved locally in that XD folder. And there should be that XD file that I provided to you, which is the wireframe for the FIP assignment, the 2 pages desktop and the 2 pages of the mobile, okay? Completed with all the images, all the styling. It's a finished design. I want you to treat that as though I am the client and you're sending me your final design for what you intend to build for my website that I'm paying for. So you're sending me this XD file. We wouldn't send an XD file, we'd send a PDF, or we'd push it to their device or something like that, but let's not even go there yet. We'll do that next term. But this is just you saying, this is what I intend to build for you with your website. And if you're following the grid system really closely, then the chances of you being able to replicate almost perfectly what you're presenting in XD versus what you're going to be building for them as an HTML document with CSS and potentially JavaScript and PHP, they should be identical. It's a contract. You are sending this saying, do you like this? Yes, I like this. Do you want me to build this for you? Yes, I want you to build this for me. Okay, you sign off on it. I sign off on it as the designer. That is a contract now. It's a binding contract. That is what I have to build for you. So if you're following a grid system really, really closely and making sure that your math works against that grid system and adds up to whatever the width of your page happens to be, then you have a greater likelihood that that is going to translate perfectly, pixel perfect carryover to the web environment, okay? So I need that XD file or any other XD files that you built as part of that process, as part of your project. Images folder, I've just got it there as a test. So as you're sort of compressing files and maybe comparing different compression formats or different levels of compression, then you can use that as just a test folder. That's why that's there and why it's called test. I love to see original content. I can't stress this enough. Clients, not as much maybe, but certainly potential employers love to see rough work. They like to see how ideas were generated. They like to see the workflow that you followed and sort of the brainstorming process that you went through to come up with solutions. So sketches and all that sort of brainstorming and lists that you've created is all part of the workflow that you use to be successful in this project. They like to see that as well. That's part of what they're looking for when they're hiring is, can we work with this individual? Does this individual seem to have that cognitive understanding of how we are going to work or how we work in this environment? Will they be able to sort of embrace that openly and quickly? And then raw photos and videos. I don't need all of these folders. I do not want any raw photos or videos if you happen to be using videos for your website for whatever reason, you very well could be. I don't need any of that information. That is all information that is suited toward the 1050 class. It's not anything that I need. And likewise, Trevor doesn't want you uploading a Photoshop file, a folder, Illustrator folder, an XD folder, whatever. He doesn't need, or a rough folder, he doesn't need any of that stuff. He only wants the stuff that is required for his course. He gets very upset. The reason I mentioned it to you is because, and understandably so, that's not what the GitHub repository is for. It's not to hold that type of content, okay? So don't upload those things to GitHub. So you do really need to understand from each of your instructors what is required of you for submission. Like I say, I'm going to go through this again tomorrow. Hopefully we have more people here so that it can benefit everyone. But that's the basics. Whatever you're using to show the design, that's what I need. I need to go into your files and pull it apart because that's what I'm grading in design and image. The other end of it is visual communications, and I'm just designing more the aesthetic. What are you doing with your color scheme? Does your color scheme clash? Does it, do you have way too many colors in there that it's distracting? Are you stretching images? Are you squishing images? Are you following consistent design patterns? So on and so forth. All those things that we talked about in visual communications. Looking at typography, looking at sort of the interactive components of your website. Whether they're truly interactive or not doesn't matter to me. I'm not looking at the interactivity of your website. I'm just looking at what you're potentially going to do in terms of interactivity. So depicting, visualizing those things in your design. Okay, sorry. Yeah, GitHub repo link for authoring, and I haven't heard back about your web course, so I really don't know. I know depending on who's teaching it, sometimes they like using GitHub, others like local, saving it locally and then submitting the entire local website to an FOL submission. So that's something you're gonna have to address with your web development course instructor. Okay, so that's the folder that you could use. You don't have to use that, but you certainly could use it for your FIP or use components of it. Okay, so here is the wireframe in XD for the FIP. Okay, so the question is, I believe, Xavier, correct me if I'm wrong, but how much can you deviate from this? So that's an excellent question, because again, it's a wireframe, so there's certain things that you probably want to follow fairly closely because it's being based off of a grid system. So I wouldn't go in and start manipulating, like turn that into a one column or this becomes a 6 column or something like that. I wouldn't make those sorts of changes. The wireframe is more or less what the wireframe is. You shouldn't sort of mess with it structurally. Obviously, from a design standpoint, you can go in and you can add color or take color away. Nothing says that this has to have a dark color or a gray. It could be white if you wanted to. And these elements could be the colorful elements, or however. So this is looking like it's some sort of input, right? So how do you do input fields? Well, the default is that you're going to have a white background and a border around it. That's sort of the default for what a form element is. But there's nothing saying that needs to be that. You could get rid of the left and right hand side, the top, and just have an underline, and now the form is the input field for that form element is just a line, or maybe a left border and the bottom, and so people know still, hey, I've got to input text there, right? So you can modify the inherent styling that makes up any of these containers. If you're like, well, I don't like this, I would rather have all of these equal size rather than these two different sizes, I want them to all be equal. I still want to use 2 columns, 2 rows for it, but I want them to be equal size. Then do that, that's fine. There's no problem in that. You're still working with the same elements, you're just changing their size and potentially their location as a result of the size change. If you're like, well, this is great, but I actually need or could use 2 rows, then make it 2 rows. You're adding to it, so that's not a problem. Is it difficult to add 2 rows or 3 rows? No, it's not. You're just taking that chunk of code in HTML and just repeating it, right? And then, of course, making sure that it's named appropriately to represent that new row. But it's really not a difficult thing to add these sorts of these elements to additional rows that are part of this design. So yeah, your page might grow in length, totally fine, because again, the page length is going to be dictated by what content you're plugging into that page. So we have images up here. This is what any sort of shape with an X through is depicting an image is going to be placed there. If you would prefer your image to be on the bottom, and you're going to use this gray area up here, and you want to use it as text, then do that. Flip them. If you want just a header and a larger image, then yeah, you could have a header here, and then this whole area could be an image. What this is really saying is it still should be 3 columns, and it needs to contain images. It needs to have some sort of visual thing in there. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a photograph. It could be an illustration that you've done. It could be logos that you're using. It could be, I don't know, whatever your site it happens to be about. It could be anything that is a visual component of your design. That does not necessarily need to be a photo if you don't want it to be. You could get clever with it. So you could use a PNG with a transparency if it was an image. Last week we worked on Daft Punk. What if we wanted to take that character, eliminate that red background altogether, and just have that character set against this area for whatever reason? Well, we might save that as a PNG. So now we'd have that character in there. This could be set to white, and so we just have that character, or maybe we put a frame around it. So you can be as creative as you want to be with how you're inserting color, how you're inserting value, or how you're not using color and value. If you want to use strokes, if you want to use drop shadows, all of that type of stuff, you're free to do any of those things that you want to do. And you know, changing your alignment if you want this right aligned and a ragged left, or if you want it center aligned for whatever reason, you could do that, right? If you want this button over in the center, over on this side, you can do that. So I want you to play with it a little bit, but the overall structure that's there, you should be following. Okay? So there is leeway, and that's what the checkpoint is all about. Hey, I did these things. Is this okay? Yeah, this looks great. Or oh, maybe you've gone a little bit too far. You've manipulated it too much, or you've just gone in and eliminated the entire section. I can't use this, so I'm going to get rid of it. You got to be careful doing that, right? Because the standard for the web class is going to be based on everybody being required to develop the same amount of content. That way they can ensure that everybody has learned that content, and so therefore they can verify that that has been taught, that has been learned, and then when you go into the second term, you can continue on rather than having to backtrack and catch up on things that maybe people missed there. So that's part of what the FIP is doing, is saying, hey, did you learn this? Now, as always, this is not an exam. You do not have to sit in a room and create your FIP alone. If you have friends, if you have peers, if you know people from the other section, and you want to get together with them and work on your FIPs sort of side by side, you can ask questions. Do you remember how to do this in HTML? Yeah, you just do this, you just do that. You can help one another. Don't copy one another. That's one thing they hate, is to see a snippet of code that is repeated in someone else's work. And they are looking for that. I can tell you right now, they are looking for that, and they will find it. It's very easy to find. It's a thumbprint. It's as easy as that to recognize, because you're using very specific naming conventions and very specific values. And if your values are identical, the likelihood of that being the case, happening naturally, is not very great. So finding people who are copying one another is very easy. Do not do it, okay? For obvious reasons. You're not learning if you're just copying. But there's nothing saying that you can't sit with a group of people and all collaborate on your understanding of the content and go, oh yeah, we did that in class. Remember, you used this code and you use these properties because it did this, that, and the next. I do remember that now. And that sort of thing is a good learning environment. So get together with people, and if you're running into problems, if you're struggling on something, perhaps that individual or individuals that you're working with might be able to help you out with those things. And likewise, in turn, you might be able to help them with something. Maybe not in code, maybe it's a design thing that you help them out with, okay? But that's what the FIP checkpoint is all about. Yes, there's a 5% grade attached to it. It's just so that people do it, so that you started the process more than anything. And so you've started the process, because this project is due in less than 2 weeks, okay? So it's worth 30%. So far better that you lose a little bit of that 5%, get the feedback that you need so that you can now fix your FIP so that you get the most amount of marks that you can from that 30% assignment. You know what I mean? Okay? So, if you make mistakes at this point, that's okay. That's what the FIP checkpoint is all about, is just to sit down and go over those issues if there are issues at all with the work that you've done. Okay, so I'd like to see something from everybody for tomorrow for the FIP for that very reason, because the week after that, week 13, or the week following this week, I want to sit down with you. And if you want to sit down and go over that stuff, we can certainly do that. Okay? Does that make more sense for that? So feel free to go in and make changes. And it's just, think of it as not much different than an empty canvas. It's just an empty canvas that has some structural components to it that actually does make your life easier. Whether you've created this or someone else has created it, it's there, and it's easy to now start plugging in content. But to customize it and make it more unique and to brand it, that's when you really come in with those things that you need, those decisions that you need to make to do that, okay? Okay, so make sure you have that, you're working from that. That is the XD file you need to be using for your design work, for design and image, my class. I will be opening your XD file and grading your FIP from that file, from this file that we're looking at. So when I open yours, it shouldn't look like this. It should look like an actual website. If I were to put it in a browser, it'd be like, oh, this is an actual functioning website, because it looks finished. It has images, it has illustrations and other design work if you're doing that. It has icons, it has logos, all the colors, all the textures, all the patterns. Whatever you're doing to it, that's what it needs to look like. It needs to look like a finished website. And then the other part of it is you will actually be building it as an actual website for your other classes, for your web class and your authoring class. Okay, are there any other questions about the FIP? Like I said, I will go over this again tomorrow, just because we are missing some people today. So hopefully those people will show up tomorrow and we can do that. And no one? Okay, that's fair, that's fair. So just keep working away at it. Get that PDF in tomorrow for the checkpoint. And like I say, over the course of the weekend, I will be going over those. I'll download them, I'll grade them. Have the grades out to you early next week, so that when we meet next week, if we do meet next week, it's not a requirement. But certainly if you want to meet, we can, and we can discuss the work that you've done up to that point on the PDF. Or on the FIP, based on the PDF that you submitted. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, then let's get to what we're going to be working on today. So this is the sort of cap off the final class with a series of challenges that I get you to work on. And yes, it's a way of me getting you to review some of the stuff that we've done through the course of the term, more specifically reviewing those things that we've done through the course of the term to better prepare you, or to ensure that you understand them for your work with the FIP, because it's a big assignment, okay? This is a group activity, so if you want to work alone on it, totally fine. If you want to work with a partner or a couple people, that's fine. It doesn't matter what combination of people that you work with. So I have 3 challenges for you today that I want you to complete in this class. And the way it works is, they're not there yet, you can't see them yet, you can't see these yet, but I will have submissions for each one of the challenges. Challenge 1, challenge 2, challenge 3. The first person, or when you complete a challenge and you submit it, just say, hey, I've completed the challenge, I'll go grab your file, and I'll check whether or not you've completed the challenge successfully. If you successfully completed the challenge, that challenge is now over, and that group wins, or that person wins the challenge. And it's all bragging rights, that's what we're playing for. Everybody's always, what's on the line? What are we playing for? You're playing for bragging rights, all right? Whatever that means, doesn't mean much maybe, okay. But you're reviewing a workflow, you're reviewing stuff that you need to know for the FIP. The next challenge will start after that someone has won the first one, that challenge ends. And then we'll move on to the second challenge and go through that same process. Next group that completes that challenge first successfully by sending it to FOL, me checking and saying, yes, you've done all of the requirements of that challenge successfully, they win. And then there'll be a third challenge after that, okay? All the challenges are all based on design stuff. The second one's a little bit of, I'll explain it when we get into it, but I think you'll be successful with the three challenges. Okay, so let's go to the first challenge. So if you go to FOL, and you go to content, you go to week 12, and feel free, like I say, to work with people on this if you want. Okay, so challenge one is working, not surprisingly, with wireframes. I know you're probably sick of this process, and if you are sick of this process, then it means you've been doing the work to be sick of it. All right, so through that redundancy, you're going to be maybe well suited to this challenge. Okay, so I've got 10 images, more than 10 images, but at least 10 images in a folder that I'll be providing to you as part of this challenge. I want you to go through the process, the exact same process that you're going to follow for your FIP, that we have been following the past 3 weeks in design and image at least. I want you to go through and do the whole wireframing component of it. It won't take as long as you think it might, because at this point you should be fairly proficient with it, okay? So what you need to do, place all 10 images back into the wireframe that I'm going to be providing to you. 10 images need to be JPEGs and in a folder named images. So you need to export them out as images, just like you're going to be doing for your website for your FIP. And I'm looking at naming conventions too, so please do not leave the naming convention that the images that are already attached to the images. They don't make any sense to us. They need to be something that is more web appropriate, one, and meet the standards of that, and communicate something specific about how we'd be using it within our design, okay? And again, this is a submission, so whenever you've done this, put it in a folder, zip it. If you're working with a partner, last name _ last name, challenge 1, C1, sorry. Zip it, upload that, and I will say, hey, it's in, I'll check it, and if you've done it all correctly, you win that challenge. So here's the challenge. Here's the folder. There are all your photos in there. They're all Pexel photos. Fantastic website for getting royalty-free imagery. You can't use it commercially, but you can use it for the purposes of placer images and just sort of proof of concept type of stuff. And then this is the wireframe XD file that you'll be working from right here. Okay? However you want to plug these images in are entirely up to you. There's no one way of doing it. Okay, have at it. The challenge is there. The instructions are repeated back in that folder as a PDF. So it looks like Rob is using the repo link for the FIP as well. And Marco says he'll grab your work from the repo as well. So it looks like the repo is being used, GitHub repo is being used for both your authoring class and your web class for the submission of the FIP. Yeah, that means that's your GitHub. Oh, okay. Yeah, just go to Window, go to Gradient. There's a Gradient tool over there as well. Yeah, I prefer this as well. So click on your object. So hit A on your, yeah, you got it. Okay, there you are. You don't need to do that. You can just go back to this gradient and just click